Well, we just passed the All-Star game in Major League Soccer's season 2023, well underway into the second half of the year for the New York Red Bulls. I'm James Birle with Nick Guzman, WFUV Sports' beat reporters for the team formerly known as the Metro Stars, now the New York Red Bulls. And they're in a bit of a tricky situation, all things considered, in this year. Some uncharted territory for the Red Bulls, at least in recent history. 13 years running into the playoffs, the MLS Cup playoffs, that is. It is the longest streak in MLS history, tied with the Seattle Sounders, but also the longest active streak in North American sports. And we over here think that that could be in jeopardy. This has been a crazy season, really, from start to finish. And we're here to break it all down for you, as this is the quote unquote all-star break. But we also got the League's Cup break coming up. We're going to be a month without MLS matches for the New York Red Bulls. So this is very much a strange time, and we thought maybe let's give you guys a little bit of an update. Nick, how are you doing right now, my man? And how do we think the New York Red Bulls are doing right now?
I'm doing good. I don't know if I can say the same thing about the New York Red Bulls. It's been an eventful season. I think that's one way to put it. There's been, the firing of Gerhard Struber. Troy Lesesne is now at the helm as head coach. We've had the Dante Van Zier racism incident against the San Jose Earthquakes, which feels like a very long time ago, but it really wasn't. But Van Zier's back with the squad now. That was a huge story, and it had a huge effect on just the team in general and every sort of facet of the Red Bull organization. There's been a lot of stuff that's happened, but the one thing that's kind of remained constant throughout this season is that, the play on the field hasn't been great. And the Red Bulls currently sit in 11th place. Like you said, James, they're, that 13-year playoff streak, longest in North American sports right now, is really in jeopardy. And, if you look at the standings right now, they need to climb past Montreal, and then DC United are in 9th place, that last playoff spot. They've got DC United with 30 points, the Red Bulls at 26. So Major League Soccer, as we've talked about before, very forgiving when it comes to, making the playoffs. A lot of teams make the playoffs. You can make a run late, but you consider, Inter Miami are in the basement right now, but they've got all kinds of reinforcements coming. There's going to be other teams in this Eastern Conference trying to climb their way into the playoff picture. And it's certainly not going to be an easy road for the Red Bulls team to keep that streak alive.
Yeah, and if we look below the playoff line right now, some teams that are there, you'd usually expect them to be above that playoff line, especially at this point in the season, as we've crossed the halfway point and we're into now. The Red Bulls have played 23 matches, but most teams have played either 23 or 24. Below that playoff line in the Eastern Conference includes CF Montreal, who were second last year, the New York Red Bulls, who were fourth last year, New York City FC, who have been a perennial playoff team every year, and Toronto FC, who were in the finals 3 times of the last 6 years, and then Inter Miami, who are about to make the biggest splash in league history when they finally welcome Lionel Messi, Sergio Busquets, and now we imagine Jordi Alba and possibly Andres Iniesta. We don't know all the stories there. Luis Suarez, his name has been brought up time and time again to join Inter Miami. But as for the New York Red Bulls, let's flash you back to the start of this season, the offseason, really, where a lot of fans really thought this was going to be a turnaround type of year for the Red Bulls, who finished with a home playoff game in 2022, got beaten pretty fairly in that home playoff game in front of a very empty Red Bull Arena on a noon start time in the playoffs. Not the most generous of start times from Major League Soccer, but still you'd like to expect a little bit more of a crowd. And they crashed out in a bad fashion. They lost their captain, Aaron Long, the U.S. men's national team center back, and he basically went unreplaced, but they made reinforcements up front. And that was the talk of the offseason, is that Dante Van Zier was going to be coming in from Union SG in the Belgian Pro League, and he didn't really hit the ground running like a lot of people expected him to do. We'll get to that in a second, but those first few matches of the season, it started in Orlando with that 1-0 loss where they played really well, got an unfortunate penalty call. Then it was 0-0 at home against Nashville, 1-1 on the road against Minnesota. Unconvincing performance after unconvincing performance. And then in their second home match of the year, they finally get their first win in their 4th game of the season. And it's their 2 designated players, Luquinhas, who fell off towards the back half of last year, and really they've needed him to become a bigger spark to be successful this year. He and Dante Van Zier got the goals in that 2-1 win. And I think at that point, we really thought, man, maybe this team is going to start looking like the team we thought they could be coming into this offseason. They've kept a lot of great players, a lot of young, great players together, some of which have really stepped up in a big way. I think the two biggest names on that list would be Daniel Edelman and Frankie Amaya, who have really stepped up in central midfield, especially with the recent departure of Christian Cáceres Jr. to Toulouse in France, which is much more recent. We'll get to that as well. But I think it was after that Columbus game at home where they won 2-1, 4 games into the season, we thought that it was going to turn things around. They were not able to win again in MLS play until May 13th. That was March 18th. It's 2 months later. They did get a win in the Open Cup, but it would be right after that they would go into perhaps one of the worst spells in club history. 1-1 draw, 1-1 draw, 1-0 loss, 2-0 loss when they were up 10 men away at Montreal. And right into that period, it was that loss against Philadelphia at home that was the final nail in the coffin. But the Red Bulls said goodbye to Gerhard Struber after 3 full seasons, or 2 full seasons and portions of the previous and now 2023 season. So was that move warranted? How much of that move was impacted by what happened against San Jose on April 8th? And was it the right call? Did they not turn the corner after the Columbus game like people expected them to? There's so much that we could read into the changing of the guard with Gerhard Struber into the Troy Lesesne era. But what for you did it the most, Nick?
I think it's a combination of things. Number one, the play on the field was not good enough. You think they were going to turn the corner after that Columbus game, and they didn't. And these problems dated back to last year. The Red Bulls have had trouble scoring goals, and it looked like despite bringing in Van Zier and doing all these other things, that those problems still existed here in 2023. But then you go beyond the on-field problems, because I think Gerhard Struber does get a little bit of a bad rap tactically from fans. I think he's better tactically than people will give him credit for. But I think after the San Jose Earthquakes incident with Dante Van Zier, I think there was really no choice for, and the way Gerhard Struber responded to it, I don't think he necessarily meant, harm by the things he said after that incident, but I think he was a little tone deaf and he was a little slow in making things right with fans and supporters. I think, there was the walkout that happened. There was it seemed like a permanent damage to that relationship between Struber and the fans. And the clubs still seemed like they were backing him for at least a little while. But I think just to try to turn the page and move on into a new era, it was necessary to let him go. So I think, right after the firing of Gerhard Struber, the Red Bulls sort of turned it around a little bit under Troy Lesesne. They got that win against NYCFC in the Hudson River Derby. They beat Montreal 2-1 at home again. They took Cincinnati to penalties in the U.S. Open Cup, and we thought maybe it was Struber all along that was sort of the problem with this team. But I think that's not really the case. I think the problems lie deeper than that. And I think whether it's been Gerhard Struber or Troy Lesesne at the helm, I think this team has been way too inconsistent in front of goal and way too inconsistent in their performances in general. I mean, you think about what this team did last season on the road in specific. They had sort of that Road Bulls mantra. They were 9-5-3 away from Red Bull Arena last year. This season, the New York Red Bulls are just 1-6-4 away from Red Bull Arena. So that tells you sort of the stark change from this year to last. And, getting results on the road in Major League Soccer is hard anywhere you go. But with that kind of road record and the Red Bulls' poor record in front of goal, it's kind of just been a season that has never really fully gotten started. So you think after the Columbus game, okay, now the Red Bulls are ready to go. Then you fire Gerhard Struber and you get the result against NYCFC. You get a couple other positive results. You think, okay, now the Red Bulls are ready to go. But every stop has been followed by a start every start rather has been followed by a stop almost immediately. And it just seems like a season that's never really gotten into first gear.
Yeah, and normally that away record, especially in Major League Soccer, would be arguably acceptable if their home record were a stark opposite. Like the Red Bulls have touted for so long being the best home team in Major League Soccer since Red Bull Arena was built in 2010. And the past 2 years have not really reflected that. They've got 5 wins at home at Red Bull Arena this year, but overall, the play just has not been good enough. And while I do think that Troy Lesesne was a breath of fresh air coming in, And I've said as much as that and more because I've really taken a liking to him as not only a manager, but as a person, just hearing from him and seeing what he's been able to do. But it was a short-lived spell of success following the firing. It was like the honeymoon type experience where they beat DC United in the Open Cup, and then they beat City in MLS play, and you think maybe they're going to hit the ground running. On the road, they get a draw to Toronto, which is, one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference, but to go away and get a draw in Canada, especially before the summer starts, is a positive result, to say the least. And then they come home and they win again at home against Montreal. You think now it's starting to build. Now this is what we've expected, but maybe the team has been a little bit more plagued with injuries than we'd like to admit. Still, now the list is as many as 5 players deep for people who are going to be available this weekend in the Leagues Cup against New England. Andres Reyes was just added to that list. Look, close your ears, Red Bulls fans, if you don't want to hear that. Your star center back may not be available in this new tournament that you have to play in. But with that said, things have not necessarily gotten all that much better. There have been good results here and there, but bad results as well. And I think a few of them before that international break, really, where we saw the U.S. men's national team lift the Nations League trophy. Right before that, the Red Bulls down 3-0 against Orlando City. That game just really got away from them. I think that's one of those games where it felt like that previous point before the walkouts and the protests where fans were just unhappy and the product on the field just wasn't there. And they come back from that, and after the break, they claw back and draw 2-2 against Charlotte FC, and then they destroy their old rivals, Atlanta United, 4-0. And you think they're going to get some pep back in their step. And since then, it's been back and forth. Once again, it's inconsistency is the best way to put it, because they look good against the Columbus Crew away from home, but they can't figure it out in front of goal. And then they beat New England Revolution, but they leave it up to the final moments of that game. And pro referees said that the goal that was disallowed for New England should have counted. So that game should have been a draw. So they got lucky in that one. They get beaten late again against Cincinnati despite playing well. And then they go on the road to Real Salt Lake, where they've never won except for that one playoff game in 2008. And they lose pretty convincingly 3-1. And now that brings us to where we are in the league and going into Leagues Cup. They're in 11th place. They're 4 points out with a game in hand on their oldest rivals, DC United. Realistically, that's going to take more than just 2 games to get back because of all the teams that are close in that area, and because we can't expect the Red Bulls to just win out their games. But when they do come back from Leagues Cup in MLS play, that first game, August 20th, it's against DC United. So that's a good omen to have your rivals, to be chasing them. It's going to be extra motivation for the players. And speaking of the players, as we are in a transfer window, we were talking about how important it was to pick up the transfer of Dante Van Zier. Arguably, if he hits certain metrics and goal scoring, it will be the transfer record for the New York Red Bulls. But the product just hasn't been there. It hasn't been working. And if I were to look at the transfer window right now, oh my, would I be making moves if I'm the New York Red Bulls? Yet the roster spots that they have just simply won't allow a lot of that unless they send players other ways, which I think is a worthy cause. But we have heard basically crickets from the New York Red Bulls in terms of players being brought in. I think a winger or another attacking midfielder piece to support the striker, or maybe even another striker that can score goals, would be the right move at this point of the year. Because let's face it, if the 2 players that have played in every game this season for you, one of them is your goalkeeper, Carlos Coronel, and the other is the striker, Tom Birle. Look, as much as we like Tom Birle, he has no business playing in every single game this season, especially with his goal scoring record. It could make sense for the Red Bulls to not only bring in another winger and attacking midfielder to support this goal scoring drought, but to bring in another striker, because Dante Van Zier very particularly plays with in a 2-striker system with someone else to support him that he can run off and play with. And right now, Corey Burke has not really looked like he's up for it. Elias Manuel has been there in moments, but in other moments has looked like he did last year. And then Tom Birle, I think, is a substitute that you use to supplement this team at best. He scored some goals this year. Do you think he's got a couple that were in big moments to get the win against Inter Miami in Fort Lauderdale, and to get that draw against San Jose in that fateful, controversial day? Whew, I mean, for me, first and foremost, I say bring in a winger, because Lewis Morgan is probably going to be out. for the rest of the season. That was your leading goal scorer last year. And if you don't replace him, you can't expect to be in a playoff race. What positions are you looking for, Nick? And should the Red Bulls bring in players this transfer window? And if they
I
don't,
think
what are we doing?
they should. And when your top scorer is Frankie Amaya in MLS play, and followed by Omir Fernandez with 4 goals and then 3 goals respectively, those are 2 midfield players, and then it's Tom Birle who has 2 goals after that. Those are your leading scorers in MLS play. And you think about who the Red Bulls have invested money in attacking wise. The 3 guys on this team making over $1 million a year: Lewis Morgan, Luquinhas, Dante Van Zier. What have you gotten offensively out of any of those guys this season? Lewis Morgan has been injured. He was a big part of this offense last year. I think it's a major reason why the Red Bulls have struggled so mightily to score goals this season. Luquinhas really has not been good enough. And you can say the same thing about Van Zier, even with the racism incident aside. So I think the obvious hole is another attacker, but it seems like the Red Bulls whether it was Manuel last year or Van Zier this year, they're bringing in attackers that just don't necessarily seem to click with the way the Red Bulls are trying to play, and they look out of place in the system, and it hasn't worked out. So I think the Red Bulls obviously need to make a move for some sort of attacking player in this transfer window, but are we going to get one? I wouldn't count on it. I really wouldn't. And I think we might have to just kind of be prepared for the fact that this is going to be the squad to take us the rest of the way through this MLS season. And there's just not enough goal scoring anywhere you look at it. And I think it's very obvious the Red Bulls need to make a move to try to counteract that. But I definitely wouldn't count on it if you're a Red Bulls fan.
And part of what made bringing in Van Zier so attractive to many fans was it also meant the departure of Patrick Klimala, who was scapegoated a lot for being the DP striker who couldn't get it done. And now I think wouldn't be unfair to say we're seeing similarities between Van Zier's impact and Klimala's. And while I think Van Zier probably brings in a better resume and a better profile than Klimala ever did, and I think some of the goals that Van Zier scored both in the Open Cup and in MLS have been perhaps a bit more impressive than any that Klimala scored. The fact of the matter is, if you're not scoring goals, this team's not going to win. Dante Van Zier was brought in specifically to score goals. Luquinhas was brought in specifically to drive the attacking play forward. And other players have stepped up in moments when it's necessary. Frankie Amaya and Omir Fernandez have earned a lot of praise, but to expect them to shoulder the burden of goal scoring and chance creation is not a recipe for success in this league. It might have been some odd years ago, but now we talked about this at the end of last season. If you want Luquinhas to be a standout as a number 10 or as a winger, he's got to be more impactful. You look at the top guys, the guys who get it done for their teams, the Carles Hills, the Hani Mukhtars, the Daniel Gazdogs, and that's just in the Eastern Conference alone. Those guys they're match winners. That plain and simple. Them alone are match winners. The team looks to them to figure things out. Right now, the New York Red Bulls do not have a single player that you turn to in order to win your game. And that has been the result of a lot of games that didn't really end in a victory. So for the New York Red Bulls going forward, I would love to see some new personnel involved. And if not, do I think that this team has what it takes to make the playoffs? I don't know. It's a tough question. They haven't looked good enough to that end to this point of the year, but with some players coming back from injury, perhaps we could see them turn the corner. But that's not to say that everything is contingent on them making the playoffs, because they got another lifeline with this new competition, or at least in this new format of the competition in the Leagues Cup. Their first match for that is tomorrow night against the New England Revolution, a team that they just beat on July 8th, with a little bit of help from the referee. I might say that VAR decision in the 93rd minute to turn around Andrew Farrell's goal, what would have been the third goal of his entire 350-plus game career. And I mean, as someone who respects loyalty to a club, I would have enjoyed seeing Andrew Farrell getting that moment with his supporters. But if it meant 3 points for the Red Bulls, I can take it another day. With that said, New England will have Carles Hill tomorrow night. They didn't have him in the MLS game 2 weeks ago. They've got also Liga MX side, Atlético San Luis, the following weekend. They have to finish among the top 2 to advance to the final, to the knockout round, excuse me. And if they do get to at least third place in the tournament, they will qualify for the CONCACAF Champions Cup, which is also going to be in a new format in 2024. Should we expect a performance to be proud of from this team in the Leagues Cup? Because right now, if I'm looking at it on paper, New England, a reinforced New England team, I don't know if I buy it. And then against San Luis, a Liga MX side who has, in a growing stage, if you will, I think the Red Bulls have a lot to prove in this Leagues Cup, but I have my doubts about whether they can even get out of this group of three. I think if I had to pick, they finished third out of three in this group.
I think if you look on paper, the talent on each of those three teams, I think the Red Bulls are in third place. And that might not be the way it all plays out, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see the way, the Red Bulls and all these other MLS teams approach the Leagues Cup, because we have a break for an MLS play. This is the only thing on their schedule for right now. So you would think that this is going to be something that is a big opportunity for all of these teams. But I think for the Red Bulls, you think about where they are in MLS play, not where they want to be. An early exit would be very disappointing, but I don't think it would necessarily be the end of the world in terms of the Red Bulls would get 2 to 3 weeks off until they have their next MLS game after this group stage. I think exiting in the group stage would be a major disappointment. The New England Revolution are a very good team, second place in the Eastern Conference. So same thing with Atletico San Luis. So this is not going to be an easy group stage by any means, and this team is not playing well right now. So I think signs point towards possibly an early exit, but you never know. You never really know with these sort of knockout competitions. And, who knows? The Red Bulls could go on a run here and it could really sort of change the narrative of what the season has been. If you make a run to the semifinals or so, quarterfinals, semifinals of the Leagues Cup, I think the narrative of this season changes. It's just how quickly that can happen. But I think even if the Red Bulls were to have an early exit here, I think taking time to regroup, maybe get some of your injured players back before MLS play starts again in mid-August wouldn't be the end of the world. But I think if you're expecting some kind of run, I think maybe lower your expectations a little bit. I think this team has not shown anything consistently from a game-to-game basis. They can string together wins that you need in this tournament, a tournament like this, knockout tournament where, you get out of the group stage and then you're into the round of 32. The Red Bulls have struggled this year stringing together wins consistently. So that doesn't really seem like a big recipe for success in a tournament like this. So I don't know if I want to predict them to finish in third place in their group, but I certainly wouldn't be that shocked if that was the case.
And yeah, like you said, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world to have that extra time off and get something similar to the period in which Troy Lesesne took over, a breath of fresh air, a chance to reset and look at what you need to do to finish in at least ninth in the Eastern Conference. Because on paper, even without new reinforcements this transfer window, which we expect not to get for the New York Red Bulls, there probably won't be any big names on paper, even if they do make some signings that really, really move the needle here. So my expectation is that this is the group that is going to finish the season in October. And if they can turn it around, I think having a break right here in August or early August, late July wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. With that said, San Luis, on the other hand, not that we can say too much about them because they're only 3 matches into their Liga MX season, but they're sitting in 6th, a win, a draw, and a loss for them. They beat the lowly Querétaro, who would have been relegated a few years ago had Liga MX kept relegation in their system. They paused it for a few years. They got smacked by Guadalajara with 10 men, but Chivas, one of the larger clubs in Mexico, and they drew Monterrey at home, which is a good result against one of the bigger teams in Mexico as well. So the Red Bulls will have their work cut out for them in Leagues Cup. They'll have their work cut out for them if they want to make the playoffs, but they've got 11 games to do it, and they've got 4 points of a difference to overcome, and they're going to have a lot of teams right there with them clawing at DC United in that 9th place spot in the playoffs. I still think that they will make the playoffs. I think that they will sort it out as injuries subside a little bit, as players come back, as the confidence starts to grow. They're going to score goals, and it's going to hit eventually. I'm not saying it's going to be perfect. I'm not saying they're going to look like 2009 Barcelona. It's going to be ugly. They're going to scrap in. It may take till decision day, but I think that they will be there in at least the 9th or 8th playoff spots where they have to play in the 3-game series to get into the quote unquote first round of playoffs. It's a new format for everything. Leagues Cup is new. The Champions League is now the Champions Cup, and the MLS playoff format is totally different with Apple TV taking charge and wanting to stream as many games as possible. So I'm putting my stamp on it. The Red Bulls will be in the playoffs. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to look good. It's going to be ugly, but I think they'll be there. Nick, what do we got?
Well, it's certainly not going to be easy when you think about a team like Inter Miami behind them in the basement right now, but the greatest player of all time has just joined their team, along with, Sergio Busquets, Jordi Alba. They're going to be coming too. And, you say the Red Bulls are going to start scoring goals. I counter with who's going to score those goals? Who's going to physically put the ball in the back of the net? It's going to be a tough road, but I think they have the personnel on paper, whether it's Van Zier, Corey Burke has a history of scoring goals in MLS. These are guys that can score goals. Dante Van Zier scoring in the Belgian league. Like, it's not like there's guys on this roster who are not capable of scoring goals. It's just they haven't done it this season in Red Bulls uniform. I'm also going to say that the streak remains alive. I think I'm a little less optimistic than you are. But when you think about Major League Soccer, with how really underwhelming and bad the Red Bulls have been, up until the All-Star break, they're 4 points out. That's the beauty of Major League Soccer and the beauty of 9 teams in the Eastern Conference making the playoffs. It really doesn't, it's going to take, like you said, James, more than 1 or 2 wins. You're going to have to go on a run in the second half just because of the volume of teams who are fighting for these spots. But it's definitely possible. And, come August 20th, when the MLS season resumes, it's time to go on a run. It's time to go on a run. It's time to go on a run right now. And I think the Red Bulls have the personnel to do it, even if they haven't shown it yet so far this season. But I'm going to say they sneak into that 8th or 9th spot and keep the streak alive for another season.
And if I can leave the Red Bulls fans with some form of optimism, in 2021, they figured it out. They got points in 10 of their final 12 games of the season. They went on a run and they scraped in and they got the final 7th and final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. Yeah, they crashed out in the first round of the playoffs, as they often do, but it was important to keep that streak alive. And they did it against a bunch of rivals. It was fueled with those 2 wins in the same week against New York City FC. Or sorry, that draw and that win in the same week against New York City FC, where they got that late penalty and then they beat them 1-0 at Yankee Stadium. If that is any glimmer of hope for you, this is who they come out of Leagues Cup to play. DC United, Inter Miami, New England, Philly, and New York City. And then another week after the New York City game, DC United again. That's pretty much Eastern Conference. Those are the teams that you have to beat if you want to be into this MLS Cup playoffs conversation. And I think that, they're going to have their work cut out for them. But if that is ever the time to do it, it's right after Leagues Cup when they need to figure it out. We both anticipate they'll have a little bit of a break in Leagues Cup before they can reset and go at it. And I think that is the make or break time in that season. We will wait and see. That's late August, early September is really going to be the crunch time moment for the Red Bulls to figure things out. But that is all the time we have. Mid-season review for the New York Red Bulls. If you were to give it a grade, Nick, what would you give it on paper? Letter grade.
It's a C-.
C-.
Everything that happened off the field as well. This has just been a very uneven season so far.
Yeah, and I may be a little bit more optimistic about the future, but I'm gonna give them a D- because I think with the expectations they had for this year and with the players that they have and the quality that they should possess, they are far, far, far below that. Stuff off the field aside, that just makes everything worse because there has been quite a lot to be disappointed about. But that's not to say that it's all hope is lost. There is still a chance, and we will wait and see. For WF Review Sports, I'm James Birle. Nick Guzman, thank you for joining us. We hope the New York Red Bulls can turn things around. We'll see you guys next time.